We're nearing the conclusion of an 8-part series that we've been in since Easter, titled The Hope of the Resurrection. In this series, we've been seeking to get a better sense of the confidence that we can, and in fact even should have as Christians because Jesus rose from the dead. This morning, we are turning our attention to how the resurrection of Jesus gives us the hope and the confidence of heaven. I think many people in our day and age are kind of ambivalent when it comes to the idea of heaven. I think many people like the idea of heaven. We like the idea of some kind of existence after death. It provides some comfort in the face of loss and grief and difficulty. But other than that, I think for a lot of people, heaven just doesn't seem very practical to our everyday lives. If we think about heaven at all, it might be something of a trifle. There's a country song that I think perfectly sums this up. The song is called Heaven. It's by Kane Brown, and the chorus goes like this. Everybody's talking about heaven like they just can't wait to go, saying how it's going to be so good, so beautiful. But lying next to you, in this bed with you, I ain't convinced. Because I don't know how heaven could be better than this. And I think that's a pretty common perspective nowadays. Many people think heaven's probably going to be great, a lot of fun, but I'd rather focus on what I have right here and right now. Even among Christians, I think there is often some level of ambivalence that we feel about heaven. We believe in heaven. We know the Bible has a lot to say about heaven, but maybe we ourselves aren't sure how that applies to our everyday lives. Some Christians even think that a focus on heaven could distract us from the more important things like service and outreach and missions. Some of us here this morning might feel an ambivalence towards heaven. Others of us maybe some confusion about what heaven is. And still others of us might wonder if heaven could make any practical difference in our lives at all. So today we are seeking to gain some clarity around what heaven is and what heaven is meant to do for us. And to get a sense of this, we will first see how our vision of heaven shapes the present. And then we'll look at the richness of the biblical vision of heaven. And lastly, we will conclude with how the resurrection gives us the confidence to hope for heaven. So first, how our vision of heaven shapes the present. Future hope, it does have a shaping effect in our lives. I think we all recognize this. We get a vision of what is to come, and we think, how do I move towards that thing? What do I need to do or learn or change in order to achieve such and such goal? I'm the fourth of 6 kids, and so that meant I got to see a lot of my older siblings get cars when they turned 16. And when you're 6 years old, and your 16-year-old brother pulls in the driveway in a Buick LeSabre, you think that that's pretty much the coolest thing in the world. And I was like, when I turn 16, that's the car I want. I want to get a Buick LeSabre just like my big brother. And so when I turned 16, I went out to Martha's Vineyard, and I worked at a cafe out there like 70, 80 hours a week, and I saved every single penny that I possibly could. And there were all sorts of fun things that I could have done. That's Martha's Vineyard in the summer. But it was this vision of a Buick LeSabre that kept me going, right? That's what I wanted. It's what I was dreaming every day as I made salad after salad. I just was thinking of this Buick LeSabre. And when I came back to Michigan, I combed Craigslist for one of those puppies. And that's how future hope works in our life, right? It changes us. It motivates us. It gives us something to aim at. It shapes our lives. The vision of that thing being it crossing a marathon, earning a degree, or some once-in-a-lifetime family vacation. It's those type of things that influence and shape our decisions in so many ways. And what I want us to see is that that's not just true for goals that we might have in our present life. It's also true of eternal things. It's also true of heaven. What we believe about heaven shapes the way that we live on earth. You've probably heard the cliche one-liner, don't be so heavenly minded that you're of no earthly good, or some variation of that. Well, C.S. Lewis kind of took that sentiment to task in his book, Mere Christianity. He's writing about the Christian hope for heaven, and he says this: A continual looking forward to the eternal world is not a form of escapism or wishful thinking, but one of the things a Christian is meant to do. If you read history, you'll find that the Christians who did most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. The apostles themselves, who set on foot the conversion of the Roman Empire, the great men who built up the Middle Ages, the English evangelicals who abolished the slave trade, all left their mark on earth precisely because their minds were occupied with heaven. It is when Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they have become so ineffective in this one. And the only thing that I would, add or kind of tweak to what Lewis said is that Christians become ineffective when we lose sight of the richness of the biblical vision of heaven. What I mean is heaven always has a shaping effect in our lives. Whether you believe in heaven or not, it is operative in your life. You could try to tell yourself there's no sun in the sky, but if you have fair skin like me and you step outside today, right, you're going to get a sunburn. Heaven is not like some kind of on-off switch that we can toggle at a whim, like whether we think there is a heaven or there isn't, or we have various ideas of what heaven might be like. It is shaping our present. The question really isn't so much, if we are or if we are not shaping our lives by heaven. The question is, by which vision of heaven are you shaping your life? Generally speaking, there are two basic visions of heaven, and to try to keep this from becoming just completely abstract, I've kind of categorized them by how they impact our life on earth. So what we'll see is that our vision of heaven either leads us to try and escape our world or to grasp our world. And we'll look at these at both very quickly at like this 30,000-foot level. So first, the escape this worldview of heaven. And the story goes something like this. Our world, especially the material world, is bad. It hasn't been subjected to futility because of sin, as Paul tells us in Romans 8. Rather, it is and always has been evil. In the beginning, spirit good and matter bad were at war, and the earth and our embodied existence is a result of that conflict. So matter, creation, bodies, they're intrinsically tainted. They're a mixture of good and bad. And our goal is to escape the bad, to escape our bodies and escape material reality, to escape creation. Heaven is seen as this place of spiritual liberation. Heaven is a place of escape. And so because of that, you should try to escape the body now. Deny yourself bodily pleasure now. Don't savor a great meal. Don't revel in the beauty of a sunset. Don't practice your faith in community. Do things that are more spiritual. And unfortunately, that view is alive and well among a lot of Christians. We might hear this refrain, Jesus just came to save our souls. And there is some truth in that, but it is far, far from the full story. Usually tied to that view is a kind of defeatism. It kind of goes like this, the world and culture are going to hell in a handbasket, and there's nothing that the church can do about it. So the best we can do is just kind of like hold on for dear life and hope things don't get too bad, and Jesus will swoop in and save us one day. But as we've seen over the past 6 weeks, that is not true. We don't have to live our lives holding our breath and crossing our fingers. We can be confident because of the resurrection. We can actually be salt and light in our world because of the resurrection. Just think about some of the specific ways that we will be seeking to be Christ's beautiful church for the good of the world this summer. We'll be doing things like making potato heads at the Hinsdale's Farmers Market. We'll be painting faces at Uniquely Thursday concerts, and all of that is leading up to a block party. Like, does it get any earthier than a block party? We wouldn't be doing those things if our view of heaven said to escape this world. And that brings us to the second vision of heaven, which is one where we grasp at this world because heaven seems boring or fake. This view says that heaven is either a figment of our imagination or a place so dull that it's not worth much consideration. This view is immortalized in the well-known phrase carpe diem, right? Seize the day. And I probably don't need to tell you that this is kind of the prevailing view in our culture. The operating principle of this view is that this world is all there is. so we should try to maximize our own pleasure and minimize our own pain. What's interesting, though, is if you finish that Carpe Diem quote, it goes on to say, seize the day, trusting as little as possible in the future. In other words, the hope of tomorrow is an illusion. Like maybe it'll be great, maybe it'll be nothing, but in either case, it's irrelevant. There is no day but today. So don't waste today thinking about tomorrow. And this just reinforces again what we've already seen. In one way or another, heaven is operative in our life. So what is the biblical vision of heaven? Well, truth be told, the Bible speaks about heaven in a couple of different ways. The first is that heaven is a current spiritual reality where God's rule and reign are delighted in. It's not a physical location within our solar system or something like that. It's a spiritual reality where the eternal love of the triune God enlivens all that there is. When a follower of Jesus dies, their spirit goes to be with Jesus in heaven. Jesus says from the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. This is sometimes referred to as the intermediate state. The second way that the Bible speaks about heaven is in its future state. When the Bible speaks of heaven in this way, it has in view the union of heaven and earth that will take place when Jesus returns to judge the living and the dead, as Jeff spoke on last week. We read of this in our call to worship. One day, the dwelling place of God will be with us. One day, this world as we know it will be thoroughly transformed and made whole. One day, all things will finally be made new. And it's this vision of heaven where we will primarily be focusing our attention for the rest of the sermon. The Bible, to help us envision what this might be like, it gives us several rich images and pictures and metaphors of what heaven will be like. We're given various glimpses of heaven, which on the one hand is helpful because we've got a lot of data to draw from, but on the other hand, it can be a little confusing because it's not always clear how all of those pieces fit together. And so the comparison that I thought of was it's kind of like Monet's haystacks. If you're familiar with those paintings, Monet painted the same scene but at different seasons throughout the year. And the result is that the same reality can look remarkably different depending on the season in which he was painting. When we gaze upon those paintings, we realize that Monet himself was looking at an even greater reality beyond those paintings. And thinking about heaven is kind of like that. The image we're looking at this morning is from Isaiah 25. It's this great, glorious feast. And it's kind of like this image that Isaiah has painted for us, where we get to gaze upon the goodness of the world to come. So what we'll do is we'll begin by looking at this feast, which will hopefully give us a window into the broader and richer reality of what heaven will be like. Isaiah 25:6, if you look at your bulletin, says this: "On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food full of marrow, of aged wine well refined." Isaiah helps us to think about heaven through the image of a feast, which is just a wonderful thing to consider. You want to get a glimpse of heaven, think about the best meal that you've ever had. For Chelsea and I, for one of our anniversaries, we went to a steakhouse in the city, and it was amazing. Before the food even came to our table, right, our mouth is watering. It's the ambiance of the room, right? It's the bread service. There's candles on the table, and the steaks are going past to other tables, and then finally it shows up at ours, and it's like, I cannot wait to cut into this thing. And then I do, and it's like butter. You know, it's just juices are going everywhere. I'm making a huge mess, and it was incredible. It was the best meal that I ever had, and I had this weird experience where I felt filled up, like it was a substantial meal, but I also felt like still kind of hungry or something, like I could still go out and do things. It was such a weird combination. I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but that's the kind of image that Isaiah paints for us. Isaiah is saying God is preparing a feast like that for us, but better. He says it's a feast of rich food full of marrow, which means that the meat is both flavorful and nutritious. Most likely, this meat would be from the fat portions of the meat, which were the best cuts. which means this thing is going to be juicy. Like you're going to need extra napkins because of just how tender and sumptuous that this meat is. And to pair with the main course, God is taking his time to prepare the finest wine. The image of wine well refined is that it's been allowed to be strengthened by leaving the dregs in during the fermentation process. I'm by no means a wine connoisseur, but as I understand it, some red wines can take decades to reach peak flavor. And Isaiah is saying there is a wine that God is specially crafting. He's taking his time to prepare for us. Just what an amazing image. And I think this image from Isaiah tells us a lot about heaven. There's something so tangible, something mouthwatering about this vision of heaven, so human, so relatable. Heaven isn't some esoteric, narrow place that only a few people could imagine. No, it's like a great feast. If one of your kids were to say, Mom, what's heaven like? You could say, think of Thanksgiving dinner. And they'd get a sense of it, wouldn't they? They would know. They would know what that feels like. They would know the joy and the smells and all that goes around a Thanksgiving meal. And so that's what Isaiah wants us to picture. Something that is relatable, something that's earthy, something that's tangible and delicious. And I think that leads us to see something even greater beyond it. And three things that I think it helps us to see are these. It tells us that first, heaven is a place of tangible delights. The goodness in the world around us, steak and wine, a sunrise and a sunset, the sights and smells and sounds of a baseball game. These are wonderful gifts to be enjoyed. They're not distractions from heaven. Instead, Isaiah helps us to see that these are pointers to heaven. Heaven isn't less tangible than our current reality. It is somehow more tangible. So if you want to get a faint picture of what heaven will be like, don't move away from the goodness of creation. Move towards it. Embrace it. Enjoy it. Savor the good things around you. Heaven will not be dull. It will be glorious. Second, heaven is a place of friends. You notice who is at this meal? In verse 6, all peoples. In other words, heaven is densely populated. Heaven isn't some exclusionary club where only the certain kind of person gets in. No, heaven is for all people who place their faith in Jesus. And what is more, we will thoroughly enjoy being with one another. All peoples will sit at table together. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Great Divorce, he pictured hell as this place where people move further and further and further apart because they can't stand each other. Their lives have been so shaped by their own narrow desires that that's kind of all they have left, is just me and my and what I want. And so they move further and further and further apart. But Isaiah says that there's a table where people from all tribes and nations and tongues gather together and feast. And the third thing that we see about heaven is that it's a place of celebration. You probably picked up on the fact that the feast Isaiah has in view is a celebratory feast. It's a celebration of God's victory over death. In verses 7 and 8, it says, He will swallow up the covering that is cast over all peoples. He will swallow up death forever. God is generous and hospitable. He sets a table for us, but he's also powerful. This meal is like no other because it begins a never-ending celebration of what God has done. And what God has done is bring Jesus back to life. Jesus' resurrection is the beginning of the fulfillment Isaiah was envisioning. When Jesus rose from the dead, death began to be swallowed up. In the resurrection, God began to remove the veil that shrouds all peoples. And when Jesus returns, this undoing of death will be forever and finally complete. God will feast on death, Isaiah is saying, and we will feast with God. And in that day, we will rejoice. As I was preparing for this sermon, I was reminded of a recent book by a man named Cameron Cole. Cameron's a graduate of Reformed Theological Seminary, and he's served in the church and family and youth ministries for over 20 years. And in 2024, he wrote a book called Heavenward. He wrote this book because, in his own words, On November 11th, 2013, his perspective shifted heavenward. Cameron goes on to explain how that was the day that his 3-year-old boy died in his sleep. Cameron's boy's name was Cam, and he was a perfectly healthy little boy. He was his oldest child, and the doctors labeled his death as a sudden, unexplained death in childhood, which is just extremely rare, but obviously just devastating. And Cameron wrote this book because of the comfort that heaven has provided for him and his wife as they grieve the loss of their son. As they continue to weep and to grieve, the hope of heaven has given them tremendous strength and confidence. Heaven, even in its current state, is a comfort. All who die in the Lord go immediately to be with Jesus in glory. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Our loved ones are safe. They're loved. They're cared for. They are with Jesus. Just think about the Jesus to whom we entrust our loved ones. Remember when Jesus found out his friend Lazarus had died. As Jesus approached the tomb, he wept. He felt the grief of loss. He felt the heartache of having to say goodbye to someone he loved too soon. He felt the agony of how sin and death have devastated God's good creation. And he burst into tears. And that's the Jesus who receives us in heaven. He is sympathetic. He's gracious. He's tender. And he's also powerful. The Jesus who receives us in heaven also called Lazarus back to life. And Jesus himself has gone through death and has risen bodily and is making all things new. Heaven is not only a comfort, it's a power. When Jesus rose from the dead, God began transforming our world. God began swallowing up death forever. When Jesus rose from the dead, everything sad started coming untrue. When Jesus rose from the dead, death itself started working backwards. Our ultimate hope is not just that we will go up there someday, but that up there will completely transform down here. Heaven isn't an escape from this world. It's the restoration of this world. One day the world as we know it will be made completely new. And it will not be less glorious than this world. It will be so much more glorious. And that's why the resurrection of Jesus gives us the confidence to shape our lives by the hope of heaven. Even now in the midst of tears. Even now, we can enjoy the world around us with open hands rather than grasping. Even now, we can cultivate friendships that will carry on into eternity. Even now, we can celebrate what our God has done through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Heaven is not just some future reality. In the resurrection of Jesus, heaven has already broken into this world. And as we follow Jesus in faith, God may even grant heaven to break into our world and into our lives and into our neighborhoods in fresh and surprising and in new ways. Would you pray with me?